Hello and welcome to another exciting lecture for developmental psychology. In this lecture, we're going to switch into middle childhood and look at the first half of cognitive in middle childhood, memory. So we are going to look at three different main things. It's going to be a relatively short lecture. We're going to look at types of memory. We're going to look at memory throughout the lifespan, and we will finish up with memory problems. So let's first define what is memory. So memory, as it's defined in cognition, is a set of processes involved in retaining, retrieving, and using information about stimuli, images, events, ideas, and skills, specifically after the original information is no longer present. So it's going to, for it to be memory, it has to be after the original information is no longer present. We're going to look at the different types of memory in a minute, but the information has to be out of immediate perceptual range. And when we're talking about memory, it can be any of a plethora of things, including stimuli, so feelings you've had, smells you've had, things you've seen, images, which relate to stimuli, things you've seen, events that have occurred, ideas that you've thought of. Those, we have memories of things that we have thought of, so ideas that we have, skills that we acquire by doing things. All of these, and when we look at it, we're going to look at, when we talk about events, ideas, then you've got people, places, things, all of those are in there. So all of these make up memory. And the important components then of memory is retaining, retrieving, and using. So retaining being the first one, you need to be able to retain the information. You need to be able to remember it. So retaining or remembering. Retrieving or recalling, you need to be able to recall. So you need to not only be able to put something into memory, but you need to remember it or recall it. And using, which when we talk about working memory, we'll get into more of what using information is, but mentally manipulating that information that is no longer present. The information processing approach in psychology, if you'll recall, we talked about a bunch of different approaches. One of them we talked about was the information processing approach. And this approach is the one that is basically the forefront of a lot of cognitive psych, especially memory. And the information processing approach, if you'll recall, looks at how the brain is like a computer. So what looks at for memory is that there's enough evidence out there that learning and memory tasks are analogous to a computer with ability to systematically convert input to output. So the way we look at the brain when we're looking at memory, we look at it in a very similar way to the way we look at computers. That storing, so what we talked about on the previous slide, we talked about retaining. So that is putting something into memory, storing something in memory. Retrieving, that is pulling something out of memory. And using, that is manipulating the information in RAM or working memory or your CPU. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. You've got actually 4 different steps, not just 3 or 4 different processes. And you've actually got more than that. The 4 different first ones are just going to be for retaining and retrieving. So first things first, you've got encoding. That is, encoding is pulling information into the system. So this comes through the senses. When information comes through our senses, this is encoding. But that's not the only type of encoding we do. When we are actively thinking about something, we are pulling stuff out of memory. We'll talk about this again in a minute, but we're pulling stuff out of memory and using this as well. Then you've got consolidation. Consolidation is processing and organizing that information in a form suitable for long-term storage. So this is basically when we talk about consolidating memories, we're talking about basically the memories getting prepped for storage. Then next, you've got storage itself, and this is the act of holding the information in the long-term memory storage. Most of our information we have is in the cortex, it's in neural connections, but the point is that you've got storage is that next component. But we don't end at that, because it doesn't matter if we can store all the information in the world. If we can't retrieve it, it doesn't matter. So retrieval is where information is then pulled out of long-term memory for you to think about or contemplate or use later. Okay, there are 3 memory systems. And the newer theorists actually look at it as more than 3, so if you look down below, you see more than 3. First, there is sensory memory. This is the information input coming in. So sensory memory is what I just circled there. And sensory memory is basically the system that holds information as a stimulus from the environment for a fraction of a second. Some of our senses are less than others. It holds it less than others. Our audio memory is actually one of our longest that we have. So if let's say you're listening to you're paying attention to something and somebody is talking, and somebody says something and you realize they said your name. Well, because of your sensory memory, you can go back for probably the last sentence they said and process that information. That is because our sensory memory, our audio sensory memory, is a bit longer. It holds it a bit longer. We can go back on things that were just said even if we weren't paying attention. However, most information in sensory memory only lasts for a fraction of a second. The next is short-term memory, and I'll come back to short-term memory in a bit, but short-term memory is 30 seconds to a few minutes. And then finally is long-term memory, and long-term memory is anywhere from a few minutes to the rest of your life. You can retain stuff in long-term memory forever. Well, as long as you're still alive. So we've got that short-term memory here and long-term memory down here. But if you notice, there's this whole set of stuff in between. And that is the affective system, the motor system, and working memory. It used to be believed that working memory and short-term memory were the same thing. But now they're starting to be viewed as separate. And the motor memory and affective memory, those aren't ones we're going to talk about, but those are other ones that are now believed to be these separate systems that kind of work with short-term and working memory to result in what occurs around us. But I will come back to that. Let's first talk about short-term memory. So short-term memory stores small amounts of information for a brief duration. 2 components there important: small amounts of information, and we actually know how much it generally stores, and for a brief duration, and we know about how long it occurs. So the amount of information, or what is in short-term memory, there's a few different things that are in short-term memory. These different things that are in short-term memory are things like, and sorry if it erased what was on here for you, the new information received from the senses. So new information received from the senses goes into short-term memory. Additionally, information that you recall from long-term memory goes into short-term memory. Both of these both of these components, both of these pieces of information can be put into short-term memory. Information from sensory memory can go into short-term memory, but also information that was stored in long-term memory can come back to short-term memory. Now, what was I talking about amount of information? Well, the amount of information is about 7 chunks of information. And one thing we know is our short-term memory and our working memory, this is where they overlap, they're about the same. And the same with what we're going to talk about in a second, which is duration. But so it holds about 7 chunks or parts or pieces of information. If I give you 7 numbers, you should be able to remember those. However, and this is the part where the chunks comes in, if you take and chunk it together, let's say I give you 7 numbers, but instead of viewing it, instead of your mind processing it as 7 independent numbers, your mind processes it as a 3-digit number and a 4-digit number. Let's say I give you 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, I could break it up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to erase that because there's better numbers to give you. Let's say I give you 5, 4, 6, and 3, 7, 9, 1. Let's say I give you those 7 numbers. 5, 4, 6, 3, 7, 9, 1. Okay? I ask you to remember it. If I added in 2 more numbers, a 5 and a 4, you are going to be unlikely to remember this set of numbers. Why are you going to be unlikely to remember this set of numbers if I just told you to remember it? I covered it up, I erased it, and I told you to remember it. You would have difficulty remembering these numbers unless you used a technique of chunking. So if you tried to remember all these numbers individually, you would have difficulty. However, what if you chunk these into 546, 379, and 154? And then I tell you to remember these numbers, 546, 379, and 154. And then I erase them, and then I take them out of your sight. And I have you keep remembering it, and then I ask you what they were. You are likely to remember them, or much more likely to remember them. Why? Because this is now 3 chunks of information rather than 9 individual pieces. So because you are able to chunk this information together rather than have it in individual pieces, it's only taking up 3 of the 7 chunks. And as you practice, you're able to create bigger and bigger chunks. When you become an expert at something, and this is one of the things that separates people who are good at something from people who are not, people who have practiced, people who are professional at something, people who have jobs doing certain things. One of the things that separates them is the fact that they are able to create larger chunks. They are able to create chunks of information that contain more, so they are able to hold more in their short-term memory relating to the profession that they do. Additionally, our short-term memory, when rehearsal is prevented, so if I do something to prevent you from rehearsing, short-term memory is about 15 to 20 seconds. It is relatively short in duration. If I give you another task where you have to think about it and then ask you to recall the original information, if 15 to 20 seconds has gone by, that information from before will no longer be in your short-term memory. It is possible you will have stored it in long-term memory, but it will be gone from short-term memory. And when we look at Clive at the end, we'll see how that affects things. Sorry if that last slide came out weird. I was having some problems with recording. Okay, so we talked about short-term memory, and we looked how short-term memory is this brief duration, small amount of information we've got in it. Well, highly overlapping with short-term memory, and like I said, memory researchers used to think that these were the same thing. Working in short-term memory were the exact same thing. But they're now believed to be separate but highly related systems. So related to short-term memory is working memory. And this is a limited capacity system for temporary storage and manipulation. The big thing here is going to be manipulation. Manipulation of information for complex tasks. So this is like if you're doing math in your head, you're using working memory. If you're trying to solve a problem, if you're trying to do spatial reasoning where you're trying to mentally rotate an object, things like this are happening in working memory, not short-term memory. Whereas short-term memory just holds information for a brief amount of time, working memory is more looking at processing and manipulating the information that occurs during more complex cognition. And again, we use short-term memory and working memory together. Your working memory is essentially manipulating the information that's in your short-term memory. That's why our working memory can't hold more information and it doesn't hold less. Our working memory is just manipulating the information that's in our short-term memory. So when you pull things out of long-term memory, you're pulling it into short-term memory, and then working memory is manipulating it. And at least that's one way to look at it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is long-term memory. But before I get there, I want to point something out. Hollywood gets memory wrong almost always. I'll even point it out on the next slide. Let me just go to that slide. So we're going to talk about long-term memory. And long-term memory is memory held in the brain long after encoding that can remain throughout the entire life in normal circumstances, all of this. However, you see here memento. And Hollywood in general does this. They call anytime you've got memory problems, anytime you've got amnesia, things like that, they say it's short-term memory loss, especially if it's temporary amnesia. It's short-term memory loss. No, that is 100% incorrect. It's long-term memory loss. Short-term memory only lasts 2 minutes. If you didn't have short-term memory, you wouldn't be able to function at all just at all, because you wouldn't be able to hold any information in your brain at all. So short-term memory and short-term memory loss isn't what Hollywood's talking about. They're talking about actually long-term memory loss. And there's different types of long-term memory loss. We'll look at those: anterograde, retrograde, and we'll look at that and how memento relates to that. And we'll come back to the movie Memento. If you haven't seen Memento, he still has long-term memories, but he can't form any new long-term memories after a certain point. So that's a type of amnesia that we will come back to. So long-term memory, you can almost view it as an archive of information about past events and knowledge. There is 2 types of long-term memory. There is memory of events, and there's memory of what's the word I'm looking for? The other word I'm looking for is memory of information, memory of facts. So those are the 2 types of long-term memory. And we'll actually look at that in a second and how that relates to memory loss, because some people can remember facts, but they can't remember events, and some people can remember events, but they can't remember facts. Long-term memory works closely with working memory, as in we pull things out of long-term memory to manipulate them in working memory. But as I said before, it's believed that you're pulling it out of long-term into short-term and then using working memory on it. The storage can stretch anywhere from 30 seconds and go as far back as one can remember. Most recent memories are more detailed. They're not necessarily the most accurate. And the most detailed memories are not necessarily the most accurate. We'll actually talk about that in just a little bit. So there's 2 types of memory, as I was saying, or 2 types of long-term memory. And I was saying memory for facts and memory for events. Well, you can break these down into, now we're going to break it down into 3 categories of memory, because those facts and events actually fall under one of the 2 main categories of long-term memory. So yes, I know I'm being confusing because I keep breaking it down more. But now we're going to look at implicit versus explicit. Implicit, also called procedural memory, involves well-practiced skills. So this is memory for skills. This type of memory works unintentionally, automatically, and without awareness. This is when you hear about muscle memory or skill memory. This is implicit memory. So as you practice something, as you practice a sport, or as you practice doing a job with your hands or anything like that. As you practice playing a video game, things like that. Your implicit memory is what is activating. You are basically creating a unconscious, automatic ability to react and act, so you act and react faster to things involving these skills. I've heard it said, sports like to say this, that you need 10,000 repetitions to get perfection. And basically that's the way it works, not directly 10,000 repetitions, but the way it works with implicit memory is the more you practice something, the more ingrained it becomes. On the other hand, we have what is normally considered long-term memory, and that's explicit memory or declarative memory. This is deliberate, effortful recollection. This is when we are remembering people, places, things, stuff like that. And this breaks down into two parts, somatic and episodic. Somatic is that memory for facts I was talking about. Episodic is the memory for experiences or events. These are all separate systems. You can have complete damage to the explicit memory and the implicit still works. You can have complete damage to the implicit, but the explicit still works. Even down here within the explicit, you can have damage to the somatic, but the episodic still works. Or you can have damage to the episodic, but the somatic still works. We will look at that in just a little bit, or at the end when we watch one of the videos, when we're talking about Clive and the fact that he can learn new skills but can't remember life experiences, stuff like that. And if he can, and he remembers specific facts too. So, like I said, we'll come back to that. So let's talk about those amnesias. I said I'd come back to the amnesias, and I would talk about memento. So you've got three different types of amnesia. I'm going to talk about two main ones, but there is actually a third one. But the third one is interestingly enough most common, and it's the one I don't have in my slides that I'm not giving you, but we'll talk about it. So the first is retrograde amnesia. This is deficit for memory of events previous to the brain trauma. So retrograde amnesia is where let's say you hit your head and the person doesn't remember their name, doesn't remember who they are, doesn't remember anyone from their lives. So this is true complete retrograde amnesia, a complete deficiency in the memory for events previous to the trauma. Then you get anterograde amnesia. So anterograde amnesia is the inability to form new memories. So when we look at memento, I said that he could remember everything before a certain point, but then couldn't form new memories. He had anterograde amnesia. When the brain injury happened to him, he lost his ability to form new memories. Everything prior to that moment he could still remember. He still had his retrograde memories, his memories previous to the brain trauma. However, he could not form new memories after that point. So he kept leaving himself notes so that he would know that he's done certain things because he isn't forming new memories. He still had perfect short-term memory. His short-term memory wasn't turning into long-term memory anymore. The final one, the one that's not here, and that's it is a form of retrograde amnesia, but it is basically a temporal amnesia. It is an amnesia that is relating to loss of memory immediately prior to a brain trauma, sometimes up to a few hours prior to a brain trauma. People who get in accidents, people who have traumatic brain injuries, people who have concussions, they will sometimes lose periods of time, sometimes up to hours of time that is immediately prior to that brain injury. Why does this happen, and why don't we even really fully classify this as an amnesia? That it happens because our long-term memories take time to encode. Our long-term memories take up to hours to fully encode. If something happens before those memories are fully encoded, those memories can be lost. So if you have a brain injury, all of the memories from the previous few hours before that are still in the process of encoding, and many of those memories may be lost because the encoding isn't done enough for you to remember those. So when we talk about amnesia, there's technically a third kind, but it isn't fully classified as an amnesia because it's more of just a temporal memory loss rather than a amnesia itself. So let's look at memory now in children and what changes after infancy that allows children to have better memory. So what happens with memory development? First is there are changes in the basic capacities that children have. So neural advances in the brain permit more working memory space and faster processing of information. So as children get older, their brain becomes more neurally advanced, means they've got more working memory space, and they process information faster, which means they can do things like school tasks, and they can start to perform arithmetic in class, those types of things. Another big one is, as children get older, they start to use more effective strategies for storing and retrieving information. They learn how to, through trial and error, how to properly memorize different things, how to remember things, and the way we do that is through more effective remembering strategies. Some of them are just rote memorization, where we just say something over and over again. Some of them are where we just associate, stuff like that. So as children get older, they learn better strategies. Because they learn better strategies, typically on their own through trial and error, they become better at storing and retrieving information. As children get older, they know more about their memory. Because they know more about their memory, it allows them to be able to utilize their memory better. They know what types of things they can remember and what types of things they can't, so they don't try to remember things that they can't remember. If you give them a whole bunch of information, they'll know that they're not going to remember all of that and that maybe they should write it down. So because they know more about memory, they're better able to utilize it. And increased knowledge about the world. So as children get older, they learn more about the world. So because they learn more about the world, they develop better scripts, they develop better schemas. These better scripts and schemas allow them to be able to remember things better because they're including these scripts and schemas into their chunked information, which allows them to better consolidate that information into long-term memory. So older children, they're faster information processors. They can juggle more information in working memory. They use more effective memory strategies in encoding and retrieving information, which allows them to remember things better. They know more about memory. They know more in general, and that larger knowledge base helps them improve their ability to learn new information and remember information. I just used the term scripts, so let's look at that. So when we talk about scripts, and we kind of looked at it already when we were talking about schema, but scripts are basically general event representations of routine activities. It's one way to say it. They are the sequence of events or the types of things that will be in a scenario or in a room, in a given area, that type of thing. The typical things that will be there that basically generally occur in those situations. So it's going to represent typical sequence and guide future behaviors. When I talk about this, you've got a script for instance, making breakfast, or a script for going to work in the morning. You wake up, you shut off your alarm, you get out of bed, you go to the bathroom, you brush your teeth, you shave, you shower, you get dressed, you ate eat breakfast, you get your coffee, you get in your car, you drive to work. That could all be the script for your morning routine. Within that, there's other scripts, like you had your bathroom script, you have your making breakfast script, you have your making coffee script, you have your getting out of bed script, you have a script for how you get dressed. These are all typical sequences of events, but you also have scripts for scenarios or situations. So if I gave you a picture and of an office, let's say, and then I took the picture away and asked you, was there a computer in that office? You are likely to say yes, even if there isn't, because in your mind, offices have computers as part of their script. Was there a stapler? Was there a light? Was there all those types of things? Because you've got those types of things in your script for what is in an office. And we have scripts for just about everything in the world. But children as young as 3 start to use scripts for familiar events. And if you ask them, okay, so what did you have for breakfast today? They will do things like report what happened in general rather than exactly what occurred during a specific event. They are more likely, especially at younger ages, to tell you incorrect things that happened as long as it was a normal thing that happens. If there's a normal way they get ready in the morning and something unusual happened and they didn't get ready that way that day, but you ask them how they got ready, they'll tell you how they normally get ready, not necessarily how they got ready on the exception. So this relates to our memories and how our memories don't necessarily memorize the entire events we have, everything that occurs during the day, because we're relying on these scripts as a way to remember what happened. You did this, this, and this because that's the script for what you normally do. This brings us to eyewitness memory. And before we get to these last few and then get to some videos, so eyewitness memory is our memory of things that we witness. It can be incorrect due to encoding errors, script biases, suggestion, and personal biases. So eyewitness memory when you witness something. One thing to note really important about eyewitness memory is eyewitness memory is fallible. All of our memory is fallible. I don't mean to scare you by saying that. We're going to look at some things in a few minutes on false memories. All of our memory is fallible. Even the clearest memories you think you have, there's actually a pretty good chance that they're not true. So we've got these different things that can cause this. Suggestion is a big one. Personal biases, our script bias. So if I showed you an accident, a scene of an accident, and then afterwards I asked you, did you see the stop sign? Even if there wasn't a stop sign, most of you would say you saw a stop sign. Why? Because I gave you the suggestion there was a stop sign, plus our script bias says that there should be a stop sign at an intersection. And that's why, like I said, I can show you a picture of an office, even if it doesn't have a computer. Your script bias is going to imply that there was a computer, and many of you will say that there was a computer. So our memories are fallible. It's just something to be aware of. Flashball memories we're going to look at how are they fallible or not? Well, flashball memories are memories of very emotional or important events. They are like a photograph in our mind. So flashball memories, when they occur, they become very vivid. We tend to be able to picture them very easily. Our belief, and this is what we're going to look at over here, our belief in memories. So our belief in everyday memories, we believe, you see here, that our everyday memories go down after time. So just our everyday memory, our memory of what we had for lunch, what we did, we generally believe our memories decline over time. They actually decline way worse than that line is showing, but we still believe they go down. However, you can see here that flashbulb memories, we don't necessarily believe that they get worse. We believe our flashbulb memories, even years after the fact, are correct, are vivid. However, in studies they've shown that with everyday memories at the top and flashbulb memories below that, the amount of details you remember and can remember correctly goes down equally. Meaning, our flashbulb memories are just as subject to memory loss, to errors in memory over time, as our everyday memories are. What your memory of what you ate for lunch, your memory of let's say a very important day, your graduation, your high school graduation, if that's a flashbulb memory to you. If not, your prom or whatever one of your flashbulb memories was. And we have individual and shared flashbulb memories. But those vivid things you remember very vividly, guess what? You're likely to have had false memories. Your memories are likely to have become just as inaccurate as what you had for lunch earlier today, yesterday, or what you did, like let's say you went to a store, your memory for that. And this is something most people don't agree that is true. But I'm going to tell you my personal story and how true this is. So I'm old enough now that I remember 9/11. Many of you don't. You're too young. Some of you maybe are a little bit older and you do. But I remember 9/11. I remember watching it on TV live as the second plane hit. I remember very vividly and distinctly watching it live as the second plane hit. So I remember watching it happen in real time on TV, but live. That's 100% a false memory. That's 100% impossible. At the time, I was working third shift, and I slept that day until 3 p.m. I went to bed before the planes hit, and I did not wake up until the afternoon at 3 p.m. when they hit in the morning. I know for a fact that I did not see it live. In my mind, I vividly recall seeing it live. That is how bad our false memories can be. And one of the biggest things that I remember vividly in my life, it is completely and 100% false. Why is that the case? Well, maybe because in the days afterwards, and even that later that day when they were showing it on the news, they were showing replays of it, and they might have forgotten a few times to remove the word live. So my mind has now associated it with live. It didn't even take long. It was months afterwards that I realized that I was recalling seeing it live, even though I know I didn't see it live. So it's even our most vivid memories we have can be false memories. Sorry if that shakes your foundation, but you should question all your memories you have. We're going to look at some videos at the end. I've got one more slide, and then we're going to look at 4 videos. And in those videos, you're going to see one of them is going to talk about how easy it is to implant false memories. And it's really scary. So it's possible, as I've been saying, it's possible to implant these false memories into people through suggestion, through bias, and through the scripts we have. Mine might have been suggestion because of what was on the TV. The bias and suggestion I show here, what's going on in these pictures is that in the 90s, and it might have even been the early 2000s, but I think it was the 90s, there was a whole bunch of people that were arrested and put in jail for molesting their children. It turns out many of them that were arrested for this didn't actually do it. The therapists that were interviewing the children were basically using suggestion. Some of them didn't even realize they were doing it, using suggestion to implant false memories of the abuse occurring. And turns out later they definitively proved in many of the cases, well, in multiple of the cases, I can't say many, but in multiple cases where the abuse did not occur, But even years later, though, those kids, as they grew up, just could not have a relationship with their parents because in their mind that abuse occurred, even if it didn't really occur. So that is one thing that psychologists and psychiatrists really, really, really need to be careful about, because it's something that it can occur and it can ruin people's lives, not just those that got put in prison, but the kids who had the false memories implanted. Let's look at some movies now, or some videos now. Unfortunately, some of these videos I like to start later. I think the Clive one, when we get to it, I like to start at the 2-minute mark, but I cannot fast forward it when I'm recording it in PowerPoint.
It's a hot summer's day. You're 8 years old and you're excited. It's the first time you've been up in a hot air balloon. You can see fields below. You feel the heat of the flame. It's something you'll never forget, a memory to last a lifetime. It's certainly not something you'd think you'd done if it had never happened.
Psychologists at Victoria University in Wellington are finding out just how easy it is to implant false memories using digitally altered photographs. There's nothing sinister about what they're trying to do. They're just trying to get to the bottom of how memory works. It's the first time anyone's investigated the power that digital technology has to change what we remember, and the results are remarkable.
It seems like the stuff of science fiction. 30 students are shown pictures of their childhood in a study they believe is about how we reminisce. In fact, it's testing how vulnerable their memories are. This is Jessica. It's day one of the experiment. When she's first shown the fake photo of her hot air balloon ride, unsurprisingly, she has no memory of it.
Tell me everything you can recall about that event. Absolutely nothing.
By the end of the week, she believes she's been in a hot air balloon, but the psychologist knows it's something she's never done.
I think we're all done on the platform.
In fact, she's being deliberately tricked.
What we've been doing is showing people a selection of photographs from their childhood. 4 photographs. 3 of them are true, and 1 of them is fake. So the 3rd photograph in the booklet always depicts a subject and another family member taking a hot air balloon ride.
But they've never actually been on that ride.
No, we know that for a fact. We interview them 3 times over the course of a week, and by the time they get to the 3rd interview, just a week later, half of them, 50% of our sample, believes they've been on a hot air balloon ride.
50% is much higher than Marianne Gary and her team ever expected. Even the students that don't remember the hot air balloon ride believe the photos are real.
We asked family members to give us a photo of the subject that shows the subject clearly from the waist up and hopefully standing next to another family member. So we get a photograph that looks something like this. And we remove everything around that we don't want. We just grab them here and copy them over, and suddenly they're in the picture.
A bit big at the moment, aren't they? They won't quite fit in the hot air balloon.
They're a bit big, so we have to transform them, make them smaller and make them fit. So we end up with something like that.
That looks fantastic. They really look like they're in there.
Over the course of the week, subjects are asked not to speak to their family about the study. Kim asks them to think about the photos every night. By the 3rd interview, their imaginations are starting to fill in the detail.
Picture myself walking onto the balloon as if I was actually there, and I ended up getting a picture of some kind of platform.
I remember looking up at the gas and the balloon proper, so I just sort of remembered stuff like that, and also looking down at sort of the patchwork on the ground because we were quite high up.
Contrary to what we believe, memory does not work like a tape recorder. Our memories are not recorded and stored faithfully in the back of our heads and then played back like on a video recorder. Memories aren't permanent. They're a reconstruction, a blend of imagination and fantasy and things that you might hear about or think about afterwards, and also, like in our case, a photograph.
What kind of implications does this have?
One of the implications is that if you remember something and you report it with great confidence, great detail, and it's very vivid and clear, got a lot of emotion, doesn't necessarily mean it really happened.
What kind of reaction do you get from people when you tell them this event didn't happen at the end of the week?
surprise, especially if they believe the event happened. They're also quite scared. Because people, they have a lot of faith in their memories. They think as a child, as an adult, they can remember their childhood quite clearly. And it's a big wake-up call when suddenly they realise their memory's not that reliable. One of the 4 photos we discussed didn't actually occur. So one of them didn't happen. You know which one that is? The balloon one. Yep, the balloon one. Yep.
It's scary, really. A hot air balloon ride is not something you'd easily forget.
So that's something that's really scary to think about. Let's get to the next video.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Okay, it's the reason
it is
I put...
available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions.
The reason I put that
Learn
video
more
in...
at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Sigh. The reason I put that video in is because it's important to note that attention has a strong impact on memory. All of the information that you were seeing in the video was hitting your sensory memory, including the gorilla being there or not. But for most of you, especially those who didn't know the gorilla was going to be there, the fact is that even though that memory was in your sensory memory, it never reached your short-term memory. Because we can only have so much information in our short-term memory, so our short-term memory relies a lot on attention. And if your attention is on something else, you are likely to miss specific things. Let's look at the next video to elaborate more on that.
The difference between these 2 men seems obvious. Their faces are different, their hair is different, even their shirts are a different color. And yet an experiment by psychologists Dan Simons and Chris Chabris at Harvard reveals that our brains actually process very little of what comes in through the eyes.
In this experiment, a subject comes up to a counter and a first experimenter hands them a consent form. As soon as they finish signing the consent form, they hand it back to the first experimenter, who then takes the consent form, ducks down behind the counter to put it away, and a different experimenter then stands up and hands the subject a packet of information and sends them into a hallway where we ask them questions about it.
This wonderful experiment uncovers an aspect of the brain's attention system known as change blindness.
Change blindness is the idea that we often miss large changes to our visual world.
Did you notice
from
that
one
he
view
changed
to
from
the
a red
next.
to a blue
We're
shirt?
often not able to see large changes that would appear to be perfectly obvious to somebody who knows they're going to happen.
And incredibly, in 75% of cases, the subjects don't notice a thing.
The lady who took me up here, she opened the door for me and told me to walk over to the desk.
This form.
All right. I think there was a sign that said experiment. And a man there gave me a form to sign.
There was the guy standing under a big sign that said experiment. And to my left, there was like a pot with some dirt in it and some plastic containers.
Oh, I filled out a form.
Okay.
Right.
This form. How long would it be about before
And I asked him how long it would take, and he said about 10, 15 minutes or so.
I guess I have the time to do that.
Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
I just signed it, and I didn't even pay attention to anything that was written on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
After you handed it back to him, did you notice anything unusual happen at all?
If you could just take this into the next one.
No, I probably wasn't even looking that direction. I probably turned and looked towards the clear door. I saw some people there.
Okay.
Then I turned back and looked at him for a second.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual at all after you signed the consent form?
No.
This is only going to take 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah. It'll be real short.
Okay.
The person who stood up was actually a different person.
Okay.
I gather you didn't notice that was different? No. A different person actually stood up and handed you this form and sent you out toward me. I gather from your reaction you didn't notice that?
No.
Okay. Don't feel bad about that. Actually, most of the time, we find about 75% of people don't notice.
You serious?
Yeah. The person who stood up with the packet was actually a different person.
Wow.
Than the first person.
That is incredible.
So I gather you didn't see it then.
I didn't catch that, no.
Okay. What's really interesting is that some people notice these changes and other people don't notice these changes.
Okay, if you could just take this.
And we really don't yet have a good idea what separates those people who don't from those people who do. It might be that there are individual differences and some people are better able to detect these sorts of changes. But it's also possible that it's just coincidence, that the people who noticed it just happened to be focusing on a feature that changed. They just happened to be paying attention to the color of the person's shirt. And the people who failed to notice it just happened to be paying attention to something else.
Very interesting stuff there again. Alright, this one unfortunately has a long intro. I wish I could get rid of it, but it's a 2-minute long intro that if we were in class I would just fast forward.
Do you know how we got here?
No.
You don't remember sitting down?
No.
I reckon we've been here about 10 minutes at least.
Well, I've no knowledge of it. My eyes have started working now, and all I've seen the whole time I've been seeing in England is that.
And do you feel absolutely normal?
Not absolutely normal, no. Completely confused.
Confused?
Yes. We've never eaten anything, never tasted anything, never touched anything, or smelled anything. What right have you assumed we're alive?
But you are?
Well, apparently, yes. But I'd like to know what the hell's been going on.
Clive was an outstanding musician.
He would take his work very, very seriously. At the same time, he loved music so much that he just really threw himself into it totally.
Clive was a musician of enormous integrity.
He was the world's expert on lassos, one of the 3 or 4 great composers of the Renaissance.
And he also worked a great deal in contemporary music and was chorus master of the London Sinfonietta, which was Europe's foremost group.
Music flows out of him, whether he's singing or playing or conducting.
Clive Waring, through a cruel twist of fortune, shows us how fundamental consciousness and memory are to our lives.
Well. No surprise. It's a smashing cinema. I've not seen you before.
I don't know. You've not seen me before?
No. This is the first time.
You pleased to see me?
Oh, bet I am. There's nobody else I care about in the world as a whole.
Oh, darling. So how are you feeling this morning?
I'm conscious for the first time. It's the first time I've seen anybody talk.
Not been conscious before? No. I've been here before this
I
morning.
haven't seen you before.
No, you haven't?
No. I've not seen anything at all before. Been completely blind the whole time.
Mm.
No taste, so this is the first taste I've had.
That's the first coffee you've had?
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers. And how are you seeing things?
Absolutely normally. The first time.
Full colour?
Yes. I've never seen anything the whole time I've been ill. No black and white, nothing.
Do you remember me arriving?
No. I don't remember any arrivals, or I don't remember writing any of that. Nothing to do with me consciously. I mean, unconscious writing.
What are you doing here?
Well, I don't know, presumably playing patience, but I mean, that's the first time I've seen any cards.
Is it?
Yes.
Do you remember starting the game? No. It all started with a headache. Clive came home one day and said he had a very bad headache. The headache didn't lift, it didn't respond to analgesics. By the fourth day, he developed quite a high fever. And on the evening of the fourth day, for a little while, he forgot his daughter's name. By the fifth day, he was very delirious.
Clive suffered from viral encephalitis, which has led to the damage of the left and the right temporal lobes, plus a good portion of the left frontal lobe. Now, the temporal lobes contain a structure called the hippocampus, which we know is implicated in memory function, and in Clive it has almost certainly been completely destroyed in both sides of his brain. It's this that is primarily responsible for his severe memory impairment. In addition, the damage to his frontal lobes also causes a number of additional memory problems, which are manifest mostly in terms of him repeating himself a lot and generally showing highly emotional behaviour.
Clive's world now consists of a moment with no past to anchor it and no future to look ahead to. It is a blinkered moment. He sees what is right in front of him, but as soon as that information hits the brain, it fades. Nothing makes an impression, nothing registers. Everything goes in perfectly well because he has all his faculties, his intellect is virtually intact, and he perceives his world as you or I do. But as soon as he's perceived it and looked away, it's gone for him. So, it's a moment-to-moment consciousness, as it were, a time vacuum. And everything before that moment is completely void. And he feels as if he's awakening afresh the whole time.
Both anterior-grade and retrograde amnesia.
Fantastic. I'm awake for the first time. You're the first person I've seen.
It's very nice to meet you.
How long has it been?
It's been about 2.5 years now, Mr. Graham.
Imagine one night, 2.5 years long.
One moment.
That's what it's been like. Not seen anything till now. Not even anything before this game. I've given the impression of being consciously awake. Not true.
He always thinks he's been awake for about 2 minutes. And that's why he looks at his watch all the time to record it. To record the fact, I've woken up. This is an important event, therefore I will write it down in my diary. So he writes, 11:54 a.m. I am now completely awake for the first time. And he underlines first time. Patience begins, because he's always playing patience. And the whole diary, every page, is a succession of entries saying almost the same thing, of first awakeness. And when he goes back and looks at his own entries, he doesn't acknowledge that they are genuine. He says he knows it's his handwriting, but as far as he's concerned, he was unconscious when he wrote them. So he quite often he'll score out what he's written before. And so his life is an ever-repeating moment of first awakening. The strongest thing in his life, I believe, and his diaries bear that out, is his love for me. And that's absolutely raw. And each time I walk into that room, it is as if it's the first time he's seen me for years.
Good heavens!
Because he still has his semantic memory, his memory for facts, but he doesn't have his episodic memory, his memory for experiences.
First time I've seen anybody at all. The first person I've seen.
You have not seen me before this morning?
No, I haven't.
I have been here. So how are you feeling this morning?
I'm conscious for the first time. It's the first time I've seen anybody at all.
You've not been conscious before? No. I've been here before this morning.
I haven't seen you before.
No, you haven't.
No. I've not seen anything at all before. Been completely blind the whole time.
You don't remember me arriving at all?
No. No, I don't remember that you were arriving at all.
No.
No idea at all.
But you know who I am? Or do you kiss all women like that?
You know I love you. I don't kiss anybody
Yes, I
else.
do know. I do know. You've written it all over your diary. Look. I bet you that if I look to see what you've written, you haven't mentioned me on that page.
No.
You've mentioned me on this page. My first thought, I adore Deborah for eternity.
That's right.
People's entries in the diary are rubbish. What does that mean?
I've no idea.
Did you write that?
I've no conscious knowledge of it at all, no. You're showing it me now for the first time.
But is it your handwriting?
Yes, it is. But I know nothing about it at all.
So how do you think it got there?
I do. I presume the doctors don't know.
But you must...
No, I haven't. You listen to me, please, for heaven's sake. When I say no, I mean exactly that. I haven't seen the book at all till now.
No, all I'm saying...
No, that means I haven't seen it, I have no knowledge of it at all. That's all. There's no knowledge of that book at all. It's entirely new to me. But just use your intelligence, and let's have a comment with your intelligence.
But you've put... Who would put that?
I don't know, but no. Oh, for heaven's sake, use your intelligence, for heaven's sake. I haven't read the bloody thing. Well, use your intelligence.
Clive gets extraordinarily angry. And who wouldn't? Because here you're not dealing with somebody who is demented, who is oblivious, who is gaga. You are dealing with a perfectly lucid, highly intelligent man who has been robbed of knowledge of his own life. And he feels deeply humiliated to be put in that position. Very, very frustrated that he can't grasp what's wrong with him, because even as you're telling him, he's forgetting the previous sentence.
There is a second video in this series. I really highly recommend it. So if you go to YouTube and search for Clive, there's Clive and Memory. There's a really good second one where it shows that he can still play the piano, he can still sing. He's got all of these types of faculties still there because he still has certain types of memory. He still has the implicit memory, the ability he can learn new things. So they did things with him where they had him doing a task and he got better and better at the task, even if he could never remember doing the task before. So he was able to learn new muscle memory, new skills. It just, he could not remember anything from the past and could not form new memories. So in this lecture, we talked about sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. We looked at the memory processing, development of memory and memory skills, and then we finished with memory issues. Thanks. Come on back.